Hello there, and welcome back to Non Name Talks.
It's great to be here. Today we're diving into something that, well, it might sound a bit soft on the surface.
Self-compassion.
Exactly. But the research and the sources we've gathered, they suggest it's incredibly powerful, really potent stuff.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. Our mission today, sift through these articles, these studies, these guides, basically pull out the key ideas. We want to understand, what is self-compassion really?
Why does it matter so much right now? What's the research actually telling us?
And crucially, how can you actually use it? How do we make it practical in our own lives?
Yeah, the sources suggest it's almost like maybe a shortcut, a way to navigate life's tricky bits, those inevitable challenges, by just being a bit kinder to ourselves.
Right. So let's start right there. What exactly is self-compassion? Because the sources are pretty clear. It's not just giving yourself a pass, right? Not just saying, oh, I'll skip the gym today because I don't feel like it.
No, absolutely not. They really emphasize that. It's explicitly not self-indulgence. It's not about dodging responsibility either.
Okay.
The core idea, really, is treating yourself with the same understanding, the same gentleness, the same kindness you'd naturally offer a close friend. Someone you care about who's really struggling or just having a hard time.
Ah, okay. So it's less about being easy on yourself and more about being supportive, like having that good friend's voice inside your own head when things get tough.
That's a really good way to put it. One source calls it seeing oneself with empathy.
Yeah.
Another just says being kind to oneself like being kind to others. It's about applying that human capacity for care inwards.
I like that. It shifts the focus from, I don't know, selfishness maybe to connection, connecting kindly with yourself. So what are the key building blocks here? The sources break it down, right?
They do, into three main components. First up is self-kindness. This means being warm, being understanding toward yourself, instead of, that harsh inner critic that tends to pipe up. Especially when things go wrong, when you fail, or when you're just feeling pain or suffering.
Which, let's be honest, is so often the default, isn't it? That critical voice can be really loud.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The second component is common humanity.
Right.
This is about recognizing that suffering, making mistakes, being imperfect, these aren't signs that you're uniquely flawed. They're just part of being human. It's universal. Everyone goes through this stuff.
So instead of feeling totally alone in your mess-ups or struggles, you realize, okay, this is part of the deal for everyone. It combats that awful feeling of isolation, like, why me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Connects you to others rather than cutting you off. And the third piece is mindfulness.
Mindfulness, how did that fit in?
It's about observing your thoughts and feelings right here in the present moment, but without judging them. So you acknowledge difficult stuff, maybe disappointment, stress, sadness. You see it clearly, like saying to yourself, okay, right now I feel disappointed.
Just noticing it.
Yeah, just noticing, rather than getting totally swept away by the feeling, or on the flip side, trying really hard to push it down or ignore it.
You just let it be there for a moment, observe it without adding extra drama or criticism. And I think the sources mention things like breathing exercises
Yeah.
as a way to help with that.
Yes, exactly. Focusing on your breath is a really practical anchor. It brings you back to the present, creates that little bit of space needed for non-judgmental observation. It's interesting, because self-esteem has been a big focus in psychology for ages.
Decades, yeah.
But self-compassion is, relatively speaking, newer on the scene. But it's gaining traction fast. And it's increasingly seen not just as a personality trait, but as a skill, something you can actually learn and develop.
A skill. Okay, so why is this skill, this internal kindness, why is it so important now? The sources seem to link it directly to the pressures of modern life.
They really do. I mean, think about it. We live in such a fast-paced, often really competitive world, and then you layer on social media.
Oh, yeah. The comparison trap.
Exactly. Constantly seeing these curated, perfect-looking lives. It heaps on the pressure, the stress. Self-compassion offers a completely different way to relate to yourself in the middle of all that. Probably a much healthier way.
It feels like a necessary buffer, almost. An antidote to that constant need for external validation, that feeling of never quite measuring up.
That's a great way to put it. And the sources are quite explicit about the links to mental health. They connect self-compassion to reduce stress, less anxiety, and actually increased happiness and general psychological well-being.
So real, tangible benefits for mental state.
Definitely. And it's highlighted as particularly important when people are facing mental health challenges, which, sadly, seem increasingly common. Especially, the sources note, Among younger adults trying to juggle work-life stuff, information overload, academic pressures, career stress, all of it.
So it's not just a nice to have, it's being identified as a vital tool for navigating today's mental landscape, which can often feel pretty stormy.
Precisely. And it also seems to build resilience.
How?
The sources suggest that practicing self-compassion and this related idea of self-empathy we might touch on later helps build up your inner mental strength,
Yeah.
your ability to bounce back, adapt, and just keep going when you hit difficulties, setbacks, maybe even a full-blown crisis.
That makes intuitive sense. If you're not spending all your energy beating yourself up when you stumble, you've got more resources left to actually deal with the problem itself.
Exactly. You free up that energy.
And you mentioned self-esteem earlier. How does self-compassion relate? Are they the same thing, just different words?
Ah, that's a really key distinction the sources make. They're not the same. While high self-esteem is generally good, it often relies on feeling successful, competent, maybe better than others.
Right, it can be conditional.
Very conditional.
Yeah.
It can tank when you fail or feel inadequate. Self-compassion, though, it doesn't depend on your performance or achievements. Research suggests it specifically helps protect you from the negative fallout when your self-esteem does take a hit or when you inevitably face failure. Because self-compassion is about your inherent worthiness of kindness simply because you're human, not because you succeeded at something.
So self-esteem can be fragile, tied to success, but self-compassion is. It's always there for you, failure or success.
That's the idea. It's a more stable anchor. It provides that buffer, especially when things go wrong.
Okay, that distinction is really helpful. So we've got a handle on what it is, why it feels so relevant now, how it differs from self-esteem. Let's get into the evidence. What does the research actually show? What happens when people practice this?
Well, the sources we looked at draw quite a bit on psychological research, including studies that have actually tested specific self-compassion training or interventions.
Right, there was one specific study mentioned focusing on emerging adults, sort of 18 to 25-year-olds. What did that pilot study find?
Yeah, that was interesting. They tested a brief self-compassion intervention. And maybe unsurprisingly, one key finding was that the participants actually showed significant increases in their own levels of self-compassion afterwards.
Okay, so it suggests you can teach it, or at least boost it. It is a learnable skill.
Seems so, but it wasn't just that.
What else changed? Did it affect other things?
Yes, and this is where it gets quite compelling. The study also found significant reductions in negative effect things like feeling sad, anxious, generally down, and importantly, significant increases in what they called positive self-regulatory resources.
Okay, what does that mean in plain English?
It included things like health self-efficacy, basically, your belief that you can actually manage your own health effectively, and also, interestingly, an increase in self-control.
Wow. Okay, linking being kinder to yourself internally with feeling more capable of managing your health and having better self-control, that's not necessarily the first connection you'd make, is it?
No, it suggests the impact goes deeper than just feeling a bit nicer. It seems to affect our internal capacity to manage ourselves. Now, regarding actual changes in health behaviors,
Like diet or exercise.
yeah, things like that. The changes weren't statistically significant across the board in this particular pilot study. It was a brief intervention, remember. But they did find some important correlations.
Such as?
Well, people who started out with higher levels of self-compassion before the intervention also tended to report more positive emotions, higher health self-efficacy, and better self-control from the get-go. So the link is there.
Right, they go together.
And there was also a marginal link found where improvements in self-compassion during the study were associated with decreases in alcohol consumption later on.
Huh. That's fascinating. Almost like cultivating that inner kindness creates the right internal conditions, or maybe boosts the resources needed to then make positive changes elsewhere.
That seems to be the implication, yeah.
Yeah.
Possibly by strengthening those internal capacities like self-efficacy and self-control. The researchers also noted, that measuring health behaviors accurately in studies is complex. And they're still refining the best ways to do that. It's an ongoing area of research.
Sounds like a really fruitful area. And what about that other study mentioned, the Marshall et al. One, the one about buffering low self-esteem?
Yes, that study provided specific evidence supporting the idea we discussed that self-compassion acts as a buffer. It helps protect people from the negative psychological hit they might otherwise feel when their self-esteem is low or when they face setbacks.
Okay, so the research is definitely pointing towards real benefits, which brings us to the big question, the one I'm really interested in. How do you actually do this stuff? How do you bring self-compassion out of the realm of theory and into, messy everyday life? The sources had some practical examples, didn't they?
They did, and this is where it becomes really tangible. It's often about small, conscious shifts in how you respond to yourself, especially in those tough moments.
Okay, like what? Give us an example.
Okay, so when you make a mistake, instead of immediately launching into that familiar self-criticism, I'm so stupid, how could I do that? The suggestion is to consciously try speaking to yourself with understanding, just like you would to that friend.
So maybe something like,
Something simple. Okay, that wasn't great, but you know what? Everyone makes mistakes. It happens. And then
Mhm.
from that calmer place, you can actually look at it and think, okay, what can I learn from this?
Right. Kindness first, then learning, not just getting stuck beating yourself up. What about feeling overwhelmed? Stress, anxiety, that kind of thing.
When you're stressed or anxious, the advice is similar. Pause. Take a breath. Just notice the feeling without piling judgment on top of it. Acknowledge it clearly. Wow, I'm feeling really stressed right now. Or, okay, anxiety's here. Remind yourself it's a normal human response.
Hmm.
It's understandable I feel worried in this situation.
Just naming it, acknowledging it, creating a bit of space around it, maybe.
Exactly. Not fighting it, not denying it, just seeing it.
Yeah.
But what about that modern minefield? Comparing yourself to others, especially online.
Ugh, yes. What do the sources say about that?
When you catch yourself comparing, the practice is to gently remind yourself. Everyone's on their own path. What you see online is usually just a highlight reel, not the full picture. No one is perfect.
Mhm.
And then consciously shift your focus back to your life, your strengths, what you value.
Bringing it back home to your own reality.
Ah.
Okay. What about external criticism? When someone else points out a flaw or mistake?
When receiving criticism, the self-compassionate approach is to try and evaluate it calmly. Ask yourself, is there something genuinely useful here? Can I learn from this? If yes, great, use it for growth. If it feels unfair, unhelpful, or just mean, practice letting it go without letting it define you or crush your self-worth.
So discern the value, don't just absorb the negativity uncritically.
Precisely. And even something really basic, like just feeling worn out. When feeling tired, recognize that exhaustion is a form of difficulty. Your body is signaling a need. Respond with kindness. Prioritize rest. Allow yourself activities that genuinely restore you, that you enjoy. Self-care isn't an indulgence in this view. It's a practical application of self-compassion.
Those are really helpful, concrete examples. The sources also mention something called self-empathy. How does that fit in? Is it different?
It's closely related, maybe a specific facet of the practice. Self-empathy is described as about acknowledging your own internal world, feelings, thoughts, impulses, again, without judgment. But it also involves observing yourself in the situation almost like an outsider, trying to understand why you're feeling or acting a certain way.
So it's like a gentle, curious investigation. Why did I react like that? Or what's driving this feeling?
Exactly, a kind curiosity. And here's a really crucial point, linking back to why this isn't about letting yourself off the hook. If this self-empathetic observation leads you to realize, okay, I messed up here, my actions caused harm, the practice isn't about making excuses. It's about acknowledging that reality, accepting your part in it, honestly. It's explicitly not about siding with yourself against someone else if you were genuinely in the wrong.
So it's about taking responsibility, but from a place of understanding rather than harsh judgment.
Precisely. It's about understanding the why behind your actions. Maybe you were stressed, scared, misinformed, not to excuse the action, but to gain the self-awareness needed to correct it and try to prevent it happening again. It's positioned as much more constructive than just blaming others or resorting to unhealthy coping mechanisms. It's facing your own stuff, but with a view towards growth.
That nuance feels really important. Understanding facilitates change, excuses prevent it.
Exactly. And, while the sources didn't lay out detailed step-by-step programs of the excerpts we saw, the research papers hinted at other tools sometimes used in these interventions, things like setting realistic goals, maybe using frameworks like SMART goals, or even writing encouraging letters to yourself. These tools can be used with that underlying self-compassionate mindset.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. As we wrap up this deep dive, what are the big takeaways? We've definitely covered a lot of potential upsides.
Yeah, the picture emerging from these sources is strongly positive. We're talking about links to reduced stress and anxiety, increased happiness, better psychological well-being overall, stronger mental resilience, potentially improved relationships,
Protection from the negative impacts of low self-esteem.
right? And even potential support for making healthier choices, improving health behaviors by boosting those inner resources. It's quite a list.
It really is. It sounds almost too good to be true. Are there any downsides? Any cautions the sources raise beyond that really important point about it not being self-indulgence?
Well, the sources we looked at overwhelmingly frame self-compassion as a beneficial skill when understood correctly. The main caution isn't really a downside of the practice itself, but rather hammering home that critical distinction. It requires honest self-awareness. It needs accountability.
Especially with that self-empathy piece.
Exactly. You're being kind to yourself because you're human, flawed, and deserving of care. But you're not using that kindness to avoid responsibility if your flaws or actions caused harm. The goal is always compassionate understanding that leads to growth and correction, not justifies staying stuck or hurting others. When it's approached responsibly like that, the sources frame it as fundamentally beneficial.
Okay, so boiling it all down for you, our listener, self-compassion, this blend of kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness, it's not just some vague, nice idea.
No, the research suggests it's a powerful practical skill, something that can genuinely improve your mental health, build your resilience, and just help you navigate the bumps in the road with maybe a bit more grace and a lot less self-inflicted suffering.
And it's a practice, isn't it? Not something you achieve overnight.
Definitely, something you cultivate moment by moment, day by day. Using those small shifts, we talked about how you respond to a mistake, how you talk to yourself when you're stressed, even just letting yourself rest when you're tired.
So here's a final thought, maybe something for you to mull over as you go about your day. This deep dive raises an important question. If being kinder and more understanding towards ourselves, especially when life gets difficult, can have such profound effects, what might actually change in your life if you intentionally practice just one small act of self-compassion today?
Something to consider. Thank you for joining us.